Hello everyone, welcome to this video on natural law. First I just want to start talking about this table here, and what I'm really trying to point out with this table is that any ethical beliefs we have are necessarily founded on metaphysics, okay? That it is our understanding of what is reality that informs our understanding about the answer to ethical questions. And so if we're to answer an ethical question, for instance, like the one of veganism or abortion, then we necessarily already have beliefs about which framework we're applying, about um, whether there is a ontological reality to good or evil, about whether ethical questions are, are, are truth apt, whether they have truth value. So all we're summarizing with this table here is that for us to have beliefs and ideas about this question, it necessarily implies a framework and an underlying metaphysics, and that they are dependent upon your metaphysics, that we can't detach them. And we've said that already, and we've tried to make as few assumptions as possible in order to get as many people around the table with regards to the conversations we're having around ethics. So some of the assumptions we're making, again, just to reiterate those, is that there's an external world, it's inhabited by people like me, and that those people have free will. And then for natural law, we tack on one more assumption. It requires that teleology is a real feature of the world. So just to recap what teleology is, for Aristotle, the telos of an object is its final cause, that's its direction, purpose, or goal, and it's the end for which it exists and which it's driven towards. So here's a number of examples here. For instance, the telos of a fin that a fish has is to help it swim and keep its balance. A number of other examples there. So natural law theory, it's first sort of developed in Aristotle and then further developed by St. Thomas Aquinas. He says, moral life is a life lived according to reason, and an immoral life is one lived at odds with reason. That human beings have an innate understanding of what is good and what is evil, but it is informed by our capacity to reason. That man, human, as a rational animal, that the rational faculties separate us from animals, and that we can use reason to unlock moral knowledge. So in order to do that, he develops what we would say is an objective standard of goodness, all right? And so for Aquinas, something is good to the degree in which it instantiates its nature or its essence. So given these two diagrams, if I was going to say which one is a better triangle, all right, if this triangle here on the left, let's say I've drawn it on a bus going down a bumpy road as it's moving on a bent piece of paper, all right, so that's why it's ended up with this shape. Like it doesn't, it's approximately triangular, but if we think of what is the nature of a triangle, it's a two-dimensional planar shape with three straight sides bound by three straight sides. Well, here my sides aren't straight at all. It's defective as a triangle. It's not living up to its complete essence or nature. Whereas this one on the right, I've generated it by the computer, and it's got the straight edges, and they're all joined together. They're bound on a two-dimensional plane. So when we're looking at this, we can say, well, the one on the right is a better example of a triangle because it instantiates its nature. Okay, so something is good to the degree in which it instantiates or fulfills its nature. Some other examples might be, an orange tree. You can have an orange tree growing in a fertile orchard, or an orange tree growing on the edge of a cliff. We think of what's the telos of an orange tree? Well, it's to produce this beautiful ripe fruit, and one that's growing in an orchard where there's plenty of nutrients available in the soil and it's got lots of water and sunlight. It's going to be good to the degree that it can absorb all of that and produce the fruit. Whereas if we think of one growing on a cliff or in a desert where its roots can't sink very deep and there's not as many nutrients there, and the rain just sort of washes over it and it doesn't seem to get enough water, that it's going to fail to fulfill its nature because of those circumstances in which it's in. If we think of a lioness, what is the nature of a lioness? It's to care and raise its young, hunting. All right, so a lioness is a good lioness to the degree in which it fulfills those goals. So that's how Aquinas derives this sort of objective measure of good. And he says, if something is good to the degree in which it instantiates its telos, it raises the question then, isn't it? What's the goal of humanity? And so here are a few different answers that we've investigated in the past. The first is that of pleasure, and that's offered by Epicurus. And he says the goal of humanity is just pleasure, just to bring yourself as much sort of happiness and joy and pleasure as you possibly can. Aristotle says no, it's not found in pleasure, but it's found in excellence, that the goal of humanity is excellence. What does it mean to be excellent across all domains of being? It means to instantiate all of the virtues, to be an embodiment of virtue. And for Aquinas, he agrees with Aristotle, but he takes it further as well. It's an embodiment of virtue, but ultimately unity with God in heaven. So that's what he says. That's our ultimate end. We're not built for this world, but for another. Just on Epicurus's point, we can think about this biologically. If Epicurus suggests that our goal is pleasure, but when we think about it from a biological perspective, pleasure is not necessarily a goal. It's not the end, but it's a means to an end. When we think about the reason we experience pleasure at a biological level. So for instance, the reason you get joy out of eating delicious food is because it's nutritive. That if we think of an evolutionary explanation for why you enjoy it, it's because it encourages you to eat. You derive pleasure from it so that you will nurture your body. All right. And the same goes with things like sex. All right. Why is it pleasurable? Well, because it allows you to continue the species. It endows a survival benefit on the individuals that did participate in it. And so pleasure is not an end, not a goal, but rather it is a means. It's a process that allows us to reach these biological goals, such as reproduction and nurturing. So anyway, we've said, along the sort of Aristotelian and Thomistic thesis that a human being is a rational animal. And so then to live up to our telos, our essence, we've said, we saw embodiment of virtue, we saw unity of God, but more fundamental to that is to be a rational animal, to be rational and to use our capacity to reason. So how's this for a knockout the park? This is the fundamental part of Aquinas' theory, that fundamentally humans should do good and avoid evil, and that reason, our capacity to reason, determines the ultimate purpose and destiny of human life is fellowship with God, and that humans naturally tend towards this destiny and should live according to their design. We should avoid being enslaved by non-natural, non-rational desires and pursue that which is rational. So that's the telos of a human being, rationality. So for Aquinas, look at this. This is his fundamental building block for natural law, which is to do good and avoid evil. What does it mean to do good? He develops the primary precepts. These are uncoverable with reason. These are precepts that enable flourishing of all people. So these are what we call the primary precepts. And then from there, he derives the secondary precepts. So if we think about one of the primary precepts, that's going to enable the flourishing of society, the opportunity for all human beings to embody and to instantiate their rationality, their fundamental telos. We have self-preservation and preservation of the internet. So I've got to look after myself and I've got to look after those in the innocent around me. So if that's a principle, what are the laws and regulations I can derive from that? And those are these ones here, secondary precepts. So that's the system that he builds up. He does make a distinction between real and apparent goods. So a real good is one that is in accordance with reason, whereas an apparent good is only one that looks that way. And it's when we examine goods closely with reason, then we can see which ones are real goods and which ones are only apparent goods. Um, so when when we're talking about the distinction between real and apparent goods, it should be noted that natural law doesn't just mean acting according to whatever you feel is natural. That we do have these base instincts, and that we don't necessarily just act impulsively on them. All right, natural law says it's about using reason. That if reason is what separates us from an animal, and an animal is someone who acts just instinctively, they don't offer any thought or have any moral reflection on their actions. A human being then is someone that uses reason to discern. So when it comes to these sort of base instincts, and you could even describe these as sort of animal instincts, but when we think of things like gluttony, okay, eating lots of hamburgers, is that gonna enable me to flourish? If I eat so many hamburgers, all right, what it's going to do is it's going to impede my health, and it's going to make me less able to do my job and to get around in my society and to participate in my society. It's going to impede my ability to perform those primary precepts. So that's why under natural law, gluttony would be something that is wrong. The same with drunkenness. If I'm to drink vodka at 10 a.m. in the morning instead of water, does this impede my ability to flourish as a teacher or as a student? And the answer is yes. It can restrict your ability to learn and to interact with other people. All right. The same with fornication, so sex outside of marriage. What does this do to flourishing in society? Does it enable a good and just society? Well, under natural law, it's like no, because if there's fornication, then it's going to enable spread of STDs. There's going to be unwanted pregnancies. There's going to be pregnancies outside of wedlock, and so forth. And obviously, like the example of rape. Okay, so under natural law, rape is if we're just thinking of the animal kingdom, okay, if we just act according to these natural tendencies, that you might think rape is something that's excusable, but definitely not under natural law, because it doesn't propagate peace and harmony in society. It doesn't enable the flourishing of all people. So don't mistake natural law with just doing whatever is natural or whatever feels natural. That's to indulge your base instincts, but rather it's about using reason to discover our nature, to inform our morality. That reason informs morality. That's what natural law is. Now, one criticism of natural law is offered by David Hume in the form of what's called the naturalistic fallacy. And his claim is just that you cannot derive an ought, you can't derive how we should act from an is, from a state of affairs, from the way things are. That an observation about reality does not flow through to an observation about, therefore, how we should act with regards to reality. So that's his claim there, being the naturalistic fallacy. So what I'd like you to have a reflection on in your journal is just briefly the differences between the four ethical frameworks that we've looked at. And then I want you to have a bit of a reflection on which one do you adhere to most. I'm thinking in particular of the table on slide 2, which was this one. All right, that we do have opinions about these questions. Okay, we do have ethical opinions, and they are necessarily founded on a framework, and then that framework necessarily founded on the metaphysics. But I'm more interested in your response to the framework. Which framework informs my decisions about these ethical questions? Am I just acting impulsively without reason? Which framework is going to provide the best answers? So I'll leave those questions up on the screen as we finish the video there. But yeah, natural law.